subject matter is really up to you. Celebration of fall, we're going to be working with some pumpkins, which you can do from real life, or you can use these photos as a reference. So I'm going to show you the drawing, blending techniques, and all the way through. And see what we come up with. Hope you enjoy and subscribe. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is creating my own pumpkin design. I've got some photo references here which you could copy identically or you can sort of make up your own. So you want to start with just some general shapes. I'm going to be pulling my larger pumpkin over on this side right here. And we'll clean up all these lines a little later. I'm going to have a smaller pumpkin in this area. And let's have a tall one in the back here. This is roughly where the three are going to be, and it's up to you how many you want to put in, and then I'm also going to have the background come through, and then we'll eventually clean up some shadow lines here as well, but they'll roughly be there. So that's the most basic forms to start. Once you get those forms in, you can start adding in all the details. So I found after doing this a couple times, the easiest way to do that is work from your stem down. So if you start with your stem here, and you know that it's going to be entering the top roughly in this region, that's a good place to start, and then every line will move from there. I'm going to start with the first divot in this pumpkin. So this one is the one that's coming straight at you. And then the next one would also be coming from the stem. Alright, this should be your lowest point, so make sure that your next one is going to be a little bit higher. Same thing for this side. They don't have to be equal, but if you want it to be that perfect pumpkin, you want it to be very similar. And then the last one there, coming out from the side. Alright, so there's your main front side of the pumpkin. Now we have to adjust this back side. This is a little far up for that stem shape, so I'm going to bring it down just a little bit. So you want it to look like there's multiple layers coming out of that back side as well. So after I draw each one of these, I just go around, clean up the edges. You can also draw some lines, since these won't really be circular. Also dictate this shape a little more. So it looks like it was cut. Some people also add like the curlicues and all those line work coming off of there. And then I'm just going to adjust the shadow a little bit so it's not going to work. So there's one of them. Let's go through and do the next one. So same idea, bring that down. And over this will be the lowest one. Out just a little further up. Oh. Just that. And then once you get the hang of this, you're just going to be repeating the same thing. The only difference on the taller one is these are just going to extend a little further up. So that one will come further. Let's have this going the opposite way. You're just going to adjust these lines. So this is the basics of the drawing. I'm going to just show you a finished one, so one that I've already cleaned up and sort of gone across. So this one has been erased out, everything's sort of finished up. So this one's going to be ready for oil pastel. So this is the first part. Remember, some colors do show up on oil pastel more than others, so if you want to make sure that you're not getting lots of those pencil lines through, you should go through and erase some of them out. I'm going to have to keep them dark just so you can see on film, but normally I would go through and I'd get rid of a lot of the darkness of the pencil so my yellows and lighter colors don't bleed through. So I'm going to fast forward ahead and I'm going to show you the start of the oil pastel. Okay, so normally the first thing you're going to do when you pick up your oil pastel is actually inspect it. So it's very rare in the art room to find one that doesn't have some other colors on it. So this is supposed to be stark white. It's probably hard to see on the camera, but you should always look and make sure that they're clean. So the first thing I do is I just start by taking a clean sheet of computer paper and just get rid of all the other colors on there. So you can see how many colors actually pulled out of that. Try to move that closer. So that's how dirty this thing actually was, and that's only cleaning it for just a touch. So you really should clean each one as you go. For the purposes of this video, I'm just going to use brand new ones so we won't have that problem. I'll dirty them as I go, and you'll see me clean them periodically. So I've got a selection here of crepas. These stuff you can find online. They're like a standard student grade oil pastel, so it's pretty good for this assignment. There are obviously more expensive ones that you can look into, and there's cheaper ones, but this is pretty good for the blending at the level we're going to do. So when you use oil pastels, usually the rule of thumb is you want to go light to dark. So I know I want this pumpkin to be this orange color with some hints of the lighter orange and darker orange. So to do that with just a variety of colors, so we only have here your white, orange, yellow, orange, and red, we need to get variations. So we're going to blend right on the paper. The easiest way to do this is start with your yellow and just start by laying down a base coat. So I'm going to start by putting in yellow into the shape I want. And I'm not sure if you can see on the camera, but the pencil line is showing up through this. So I talked about that earlier when I was doing the drawing. So all I'm doing right now is just putting in a color block of my lightest color, whichever one it happens to be when you're doing yours. So this is a light layer. The harder you push down, the more layers you do. It'll start to lose the paper behind it, and you can make it really thick. So I usually start pretty light because I know I'm going to blend other colors in. So I don't typically push down that hard to begin with. So there's the first layer of color. The next one is my orange. I want to start bringing this color into the yellow. So some people like to work with these line qualities, so they actually like the way it looks streaky like that. If you're not one of those people, I'll show you how to fix that. But the yellow should be showing through a little bit. There's a little bit of mixing of the colors if your eye is fusing them together. And then I'm going to take my lighter color, my yellow. You can just peel these back as well as you go. And by going over a second time, it's going to start to blend those color on the paper for me. If at any point you mess up, so say they got too dark, all you got to do is take your nail and scratch it off. You can reapply. So because we're working with pumpkins, and most of the stuff you do with oil pastel will have some texture, it's okay if it's not perfectly blended. So a lot of times you'll end up getting line quality like this, which is okay. All right, so I'm slowly getting rid of all the paper. I'm going to bounce back to my orange again. So when I work with oil pastel, I'm always going constantly back and forth and back and forth. It's not the same as just coloring in like with a crayon. You want to make sure that you're using color after color and sort of blending them as you go. You can also introduce some white into it. Let's say I wanted to have a highlight. Usually in the center you would have that. And then my darker orange, which is where the crevice would be. I'm going to show you one side red and one side brown. And then you can decide sort of which one you're going for, and then I'll mix them so they make sense. I start with a layer of red. Add in the orange, and I can start to get it looking like it's actually 3D and coming around. So that's the red side. Here's what the brown would look like. And this brown's actually pretty close to orange as is, so I bet this one will be what most people would go with. You can see the variation between the two. Alright, now I'll show you red and brown. Here's adding the brown into that red color. And also as you get layer after layer, it does become harder to mix. So like this color here is putting up a bit of a fight. So I'm going back and forth, just trying to force the color into each other. You can do the same on this side, add a little bit of red so they match. Alright, for a lot of you that might be too bright. So if you look at these pumpkins, they actually don't have a lot of variation. When you use oil pastel, it's fun to include a lot more colors. So by adding in way more yellow, there'll be areas that are darker, so different divots and things from the pumpkin hitting the ground or the way it's growing. So some of that stuff is actually nice, and I just leave right in. And so as I go, I just go piece by piece, little by little. So the next one I'm going to put in. So on this one I'm going to leave yellow there. In the center I'm going to barely press down. This one's got a strong highlight. And then go back with the yellow. So I'm using the edge this time. So by using the edge, I can cover the area very quickly. Sort of get rid of all those white spots right off the bat. If you don't like these areas, again, you can just scrape them right off. They'll pick up colors as you go, which can be frustrating for a lot of people. Let's add some white into there. And white will pretty much soften up every color. Remember, as you color though, you're going to be getting that on there, so make sure you get rid of it before you introduce it to the next color. Let's go over to our brown. So because this one has a bigger overlap, remember there has to be some sort of shading there. I just add the shading. This is where the divot would be. This one won't be as strong because this is the highlight side. And look how I'm always going the same pattern back and forth. All right, I'm going to jump ahead to the stem. So I'm going to finish the rest of these. I'm going to do these threes actually, and then I'll show you how to do the back, and then we'll move on to the stem from there. So let's fast forward just a touch. Okay, so I've got the majority of this put in. So I did hold off a little in this area because I want to show you when you have a pumpkin or an object facing there, we have to create that depth. So in this area in particular, you're going to want to drag that shadow around. So I'm taking the darker color. Add some red in there too. And you can even add just a touch of black. Or pull that through. So this is another blending technique. So we're using your finger to blend as well. So that would be the darkest area there on that shadow side. So going through and making sure you're getting all this shade correct so it looks like the pumpkin is in fact three-dimensional. Alright, so there's the basics of the front of the pumpkin. Now we're going to address the back. So the back is really similar to the front. The only difference is you now have depth, so you're going the opposite direction there. So I have to be able to do the same thing I did and just think about where the highlight is coming from. So the highlight in this case would be hitting the very top of the pumpkin right there. So that means I'm going to start by outlining the orange and go very lightly, bring back in where the highlight should be, which is up there. And then your darks are going to take over a lot of it. So you've got just that pop of color, which is then going to show that that's a 3D object. So let's try that one again. I'm going to start by filling it with my light color. Let's do both sides while we do this. And leave the highlight where it belongs. So I'm putting a line there because remember, shadow, object in front creates shadow. Lightly tinting it with the color. Go back in with the highlight. And adding in your darks on the line, blending out. And then I would just spend some more time sort of finessing and make sure it looks good. And we got one more here. So a lot of this is just the same pattern over and over. Just taking colors going back and forth. And I decided to use a little bit more red. When I first showed you that one, I think it does make it stand out quite a bit. And then you got your shadow. It's being created by the stem there. Alright, that's the pumpkin. Now for the stem. So remember, light to dark. So I'm going to start with my light color. So I want this to have a green tone to it. You will pick up other colors as you do this. That's just sort of the beast of oil pastel, so I don't really let it get to me. Just sort of work with it, scratch it out as you go. The top part I want to be hints of yellow and white. It looks like it was just picked. And then the rest of this I'm going to do greens and browns. So remember, I'm following the pattern. Alright, let's pull some browns in, especially around the base. I'm going to go back to remember the light color and blend. I'm going to make sure that line really stands out. A touch of black in a couple of these areas. Now, I rarely actually leave it stark black because it does look like an outline. So if you've watched, every time I've touched the black, I've always gone through and added my other shadow color. You don't want it to all be outlined, which will typically make it look very, very cartoony. I'm just going to pull out a couple other shadows in here with the blacks. Since we are dealing with the base of the pumpkin, that's where it would be darkest. That'll help unify it all up. So it looks like the shadow going through. So if you wanted to add the vine work, I just added that right in. All you have to do is really press down. Now it should start to take over the color. Remember, this only works for certain colors. But adding elements like that sort of help with the eye. Make it look in the right directions. So that's the basics of the pumpkin. Depending on what color you did your table, so let's say my table is a what do we got here? Blue. So I'd start to lay all this color down throughout here. So we'd want this to be a very crisp line. And that is difficult to do with oil pastel, to get it to be crisp. Remember, quickest way to fill in is to just rub it on. And then to create the shadow look on this, we're going to add black right onto the blue. So we want this to appear like it's sitting. So the black would actually be very, very dark, right where it meets the pumpkin. This will really help make it stand out as well. And my shadow was roughly somewhere around there. So as it dissipates out, it's going to get less dark. I'm going to start by pressing hard around the pumpkin. And start to blend with the blue. And then you can even soften up the edge if you don't want it to be clear exactly where it is, and it'll start to merge with the other color. So what this does is it grounds an object. You'd have to mess around with the size, make sure that it's appropriate for what it is. I think for this size pumpkin, this would actually probably go all the way into the back. If we got our light source coming from this way, we'd probably push out a little bit more. So I'd keep messing around with the shape. That would make it look a little more normal. And adding in the blues, getting rid of the paper, but start to ground the object. And then again, once you start adding in the sky, working with all the colors, it'll start to really look 3D, especially with these lines and shading and highlights. So that's the basics of oil pastel. There is different ways to work with this too, where you can scratch out. So there are some artists who put tons of color down and go through and scratch in the designs. There's other artists who take and they flick on texture and color. So by flicking and pressing down very hard, I can get a lot more of this pigment out and leave it really thick. So my suggestion would be just have fun with it, try some different things, see what fits your style the best, and just make sure you're going back and forth with each color over and over until you're happy with the results. Oil pastel is meant to be impasto, really thick. So you don't want to thin this out. If you're looking for something that's more blended and thin, you should be working with chalk pastels and switch over to a different medium. So we want to explore this side of using really thick, textured, quality medium.